Happy New Year and welcome to Live from Caid. Tonight's guest is the Crescent Principal Herald, Lady Ariana verch Gwenllian. And featuring an encore performance by guests of the show from across the known world. Me? Haha, I'm your announcer, Master Bjorn of the Northern Sea. And here's your host, Master Laertes McBride.
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us. I hope the holidays were good for you and yours. And we're back. Oh my gosh, another season. Anyway, so we'll get a couple of housekeeping items out of the way, and then we'll get to the show. First off, it was announced today that the SCA has published a survey for paid members to kind of look into getting away with our paper membership cards, and everything will be electronic. And they're talking about being able to use QR codes to check in and etc. So if you're a member, please go to sca.org, log in, and it's like a 2-question survey. Anyway, and then evidently while we were gone, it was it was the time to announce all the journal schedule for the wars. So if you like to enjoy big events during the time of a pandemic, we right now have Gulf Wars and Great Western War scheduled for the same weekend. And then Estrella, which I think is war, is scheduled for the second weekend of November. And then there was an update today on Pinzik. That Pinzik is contingent on the state of Pennsylvania allowing them to hold it. So that's what the last half of the year looks like, starting in August. Good luck. And then a reminder, and it really kind of folds in what we're going to be talking about this week with our guest, is that we have 12th Night Court scheduled for this Saturday at 1 o'clock. We'll get into more about that when we bring our first guest in. And speaking of guests, let's go ahead and bring in our dear friend Bjorn and see how he's doing this fine 2021. Hello. Well, you're still muted. Hold on. Now you're not. Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. See, I almost forgot because we took 2 weeks off.
Yes, I flickered my eyes down and I was like, oh, I'm muted. Well, we'll see what happens. But I was not. So,
oh, man.
Yeah.
I used to watch my friend Flicker when I was growing up. Or was that Flicka? Flicka, my friend Flicker.
Yes, my friend Flicker is, I think it's an eye exam. I'm not sure.
Or something that you need a credit card to watch online. So anyway, how have you been?
I am fine. We had for some strange reason, everything that I say will probably be shared sentimentally by many of the people that are watching. It was a quiet holiday, a quiet Christmas, a quiet New Year's, except for let's see, we have had everything from people who set snakes, the little fireworks snakes in the street, which just basically look like ash after 45 seconds on a really, really, really long cigarette, to, and I'm not making this up, cannons. Yes, within the confines of the Kingdom of Caid during New Year's Eve, cannonades were fired.
Wow.
Yeah, and everything in between. So
did that involve Duke Guy? Because I could totally.
No, it wasn't us. It was not us. It was people around us. We'll charitably say the mundanes. That's all I'll say.
Nice. You know, the little worms you're talking about, I used to look, nowadays, what it reminds me of is if you watch Dr. Pimple Popper, and she goes in and gets those pores and then the thing comes out. It's exactly what it looks like. You're welcome with that imagery. So,
you know, this is the dining hour for many people, sir. I just want to remind you.
Anymore. So, with a smooth transition into your arts and science websites for the week, what do you have to recommend?
Oh, after that. Well, here we go. So since this is the beginning of 2021, one of the things that I wanted to do was also go back to the beginning. And to that end, I wanted to talk about perhaps some of the things that drew us to our secondary personas, or the things that we were attracted to after we initially joined the SCA. Many of us saw the knights in shining armor. We saw the beautiful costuming, the medieval garb, and we thought, this is where I want to be. But then most of us, after some point, saw What are Romano-Celts? What is a Gaul? Talk to me again about the Romans. And I see all these guys running around that look like Spartans. What's all that about? And so, to those people that have that ancient history bent, all the Persian and whatnot, these are the two that I was going to show for this particular week. And the first one comes to me from the Honorable Lady Avicia Neviana, and it is the Digital Maps of the Ancient World. This website is exactly what it says. But it's not just ancient maps or digital maps. It's also literature, recommended reading, media, art. But in particular, it has, just like it says, digital maps of the ancient world. You can go onto the website and there are drop-down menus where you can go to various aspects. The one that I chose, just to look, because I do have an alternate persona in the SCA that has a Roman name. And I looked at provinces of the Roman Empire, and they have them. And more than that, there's really cool things to look at. For example, oh, look, here's this province in Britannia. And look, there are 3 different maps about Londinium. And I just thought that was really cool. And it's some of them are not as exact or as in depth as perhaps we would like for doing some of the research that we do, but on the other hand, some of them are. Since it is a compilation drawn across the web from various entities, then of course the level of scholarship and the level of detail will be commensurate depending upon the person that put it together in the first place. However, it is a wonderful compilation of ancient digital maps drawn from across the ancient world. So I thought that was a wonderful one. And thank you to Avicia for bringing it to my attention, because it is truly magnificent. And it's just a really neat thing to look at these forms and try and go, okay, my persona would have lived here. And in some instances, especially when I was looking at the Roman provinces, you can go, I lived in that house on that block. So cool. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, this is coming to me from a wonderful friend and cousin in the Kingdom of Glenavon, Her Excellency Mistress Ariel de Brabazon. Now, Mistress Ariel is the once and future Baroness of the Barony of Greynish in Glenavon, and she is also a fantastic artisan. And she has a Facebook page that talks about the miscellany within the SCA, and this was brought to my attention, and it is the fact that the entire Acropolis Museum is now digital. So the Acropolis Museum has completely digitized all of their exhibits, and they're now available anywhere in the world. Because of the pandemic, and once again, we do have to take a moment and realize that while these are all really neat things that we're seeing, a lot of it is because of the very real stress that has been placed on some of these more vulnerable programs in, admittedly, some of the more vulnerable states in the world, Greece being one of them. Because of these lockdowns and because of the limits to the ability for people to come and visit these museums, they decided to try and make their collections more accessible. And so they announced a project where they were going to try and digitize their entire series of collections. And so we're talking about all of these archaeological finds from Athens' Sacred Rock, which is exactly what the Acropolis is. So we're talking about an array of multimedia applications, games, videos, 3D images. And this is the first of Greece's museums to go fully digital. So while there are some hiccups here and there on the website, the fact is it has been a tremendous success almost entirely. And those few little catches will be ironed out before too long. And it looks like because of the success, even this early, many of the other museums within the country of Greece will soon follow in its footsteps. So while this has been a trend that's been growing in other places over the past several years, this is something that has been a unique situation happening within Greece very recently. and they had only started looking into digitizing most of their collections within the last 5 years. So all 2,156 artifacts within the Acropolis have been scanned and digitized and are available for you to view. It is truly beautiful to see the detail and how some of these pieces remain in such excellent shape. And we really have to be thankful, because some of these antiquities, well, we don't even know what hasn't survived because of just the ravages of time, the ravages of war, and the ravages of ignorance, if I'm going to be honest about it. But hopefully, this is the first step in Greece being able to showcase some of these most majestic and beautiful items in their collections for the rest of the world to see. So hopefully these two websites will scratch that ancient history itch and give you a chance to take a look at things as we start the new year anew, with fresh set of eyes on perhaps when the weather starts to warm up, what kind of garb you might want to look into, or what other things you might want to work on for your next arts project.
Wow, it's very cool. So I guess what you're saying when it comes to digital museums is that Greece is the word.
That's what you heard.
Yeah, I got chills, and they're multiplying. Anyway, so who is our first guest this evening of the new year?
We are very fortunate in that we have none other than Caid's Crescent Principal Herald, Ariana verch Gwenllian. And she is going to be talking to us about, well, just the processes of what it is to be top herald within the kingdom, and go over some of the decisions and things that have been made recently, in addition to some information for this upcoming court.
I think I started a Greece sing-along in the chat, by the way. Anyway, all right, let's bring her on. And she'll be here in right about now. Hold on, I got to unmute you. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. So thank you for joining us. I know there's a lot of going on in your position that you have. It's been oddly busy, but not traveling busy. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity, because if I understand right, the court that's coming up soon, it might be a transition coming up in the office. Is that correct?
Yes. So this Saturday is actually going to be my last court as Crescent Principal Herald. I stepped down, and Mistress Mary verch Gwenllian, and Mary, I'm very sorry if I mispronounced that. It's Welsh. We, even with a Welsh name, us heralds still have problems with that. But she'll be taking over the mantle, and she is an amazing herald here in Caid. Obviously, I'm very well known. I'm pretty sure that most people remember her from her very outstanding Old English introductions into a coronation just a couple years ago, that she documented all on her own and did an amazing performance on. So she'll be taking over as Crescent. So we'll be changing over at the same time that we'll be receiving a new king and queen.
Nice. And we'll get to that in just a second. We'll talk about this coming weekend. But what exactly are the responsibilities and duties of being the Crescent Principal Herald in the kingdom?
So the Crescent Principal Herald is mainly an administrative thing. Your main functions are just making sure that the college has the tools that they need in order to run and handle all of the paperwork that kind of comes in. For the most part, you're starting off as the person who takes care of warrants. You're just making sure that all the different deputies have what they need in order to do their jobs, like Dolphin Herald, who does submissions, and then Bellows Herald, who handles lists, especially for crown tournament and that sort of thing. And then all of the territorial heralds, who handle all of the local stuff on a more regional level. So it's a lot of paperwork, but at the same time, as long as everybody else is still doing their paperwork, it's just basically compiling it and making sure everybody's following the rules, and then filling out all the reports. So it's fairly easy.
You make it sound exciting.
I know, right? There's a lot. there's a lot more fun to it, especially when you get to come up with new ceremonies, or you get the challenges thrown at you of like, hey, we're going to do something outside of tradition. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, let's find out how to do that and keep tradition in mind, but also add in the pageantry and the weight of the moment that needs to be represented in that. So
Now, is the position also kind of like the official voice of the crown in court?
not traditionally.
Right.
That's what our Golden Rose Herald is usually. The Golden Rose is the voice of the crown due to the restrictions kind of how, no live events and whatnot. I've taken over for it for the end of this reign and whatnot, to try to keep things on track and try to keep things a little more centralized.
Right.
It's been a little bit of a challenge, primarily because you have to take everything that you normally do in a live court and try to figure out how that translates over into the digital side of things and still keep that connection that live courts have. And still try to keep the weight of it and try to keep people's interest and keep them engaged, because you lose that interaction that you normally will have. So it's been kind of fun trying to figure out how to do that.
Well, I can say that, I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to work with you and Mrs. Meliora when producing and basically getting the online courts out. We kind of scrambled together, but the scripts and the guidance that you were able to give really makes Meliora and my job much easier, because we're able to follow along and kind of give a better experience to the people that are sitting looking at court from a piece of glass. So I know there was a lot of work on your side, and gosh, you had to work with a crown to get things done and get it put together so that it comes across as a produced, thought out show, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, thankfully this crown is very cognizant of theater and very cognizant of how to kind of create that interaction. So they've actually made the job very easy, at least easier than it could be. But it helps that my outside of SCA, my job is in live production. So I was able to kind of take a lot of that stage management or the live production aspects of it and turn it into something that I'm familiar with. So that's why we ended up with a script, because it allows everybody to follow along and make those camera changes, make those audio changes when it needs to happen. We still have some extemporaneous sort of elements to it. None of the responses are scripted, obviously. It's mostly just the outline, but that gives it a little bit more of that organic feel. Right. then it's just like, oh, I'm reading the lines and everything like that. But I forgot where I was going with that.
I was going to say, and it allows me to scramble around trying to figure out what's next. So
right, exactly. So it does give a little bit more structure to it, so that, because there are a lot more working parts when you do a live court in person, you have that interaction, but you don't have to worry about like who's speaking to one, because people can just turn their heads. You have to worry about everybody being able to hear you, which is lovely in this format because everybody can hear you. But it does create some challenges. So.
Right. I think a couple of things we could add to it is put a live mic on Giuseppe and Giles, because we missed their commentary during court. So I think we should just have like a secondary audio track for going forward for them.
Waldorf.
Yeah.
Up in the corner.
And I think since you have experience putting on live shows and such, that the next court should be as a musical. So if you want to take that under consideration.
Well, at that point, we will have to pass that lovely suggestion to Mistress Mary, because my next court will be indeterminate in the future. I'm happy to help and try to arrange that, but I have no musical talent. So
neither do I. So is it something you've worked up through the College of Heralds to be in this position?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So as Crescent Principal Herald, you need to be a herald of what we call capital H status, and that's there are 4 levels. There's Macer, Pursuivant, Herald, and then Herald Extraordinary. And that's basically like the beginning is the people, or the Macers are the folks who are just learning. The Pursuivants are the folks who have like a good idea of what's going on. The capital H Heralds are the essentially masters of the craft, and the Heralds Extraordinary are those who are literally like the best of the best. They are the veritable experts in whatever form that they are, if not all of heraldry. I mean, you're looking at Ariana, you're looking at Mary, you're looking at Paul, you're looking at Bruce, you're looking at Aelin, and these are all like the really heavy hitters. And there's more. I mean, we have 12 now, and every single one of them, I can't name them all off the top of my head. I'm sorry, all of you. But they are all the paramounts of what it is to be a herald. So as Crescent, though, you just need to be pretty much a master and know all the different aspects of it, because you are overseeing all of it. And me personally, this is in April, about my 10th year, and I've been a herald since day one. I came in with a bunch of armory and a bunch of names already researched, and just kind of hit the road because it's what I like to do. So yeah, I've worked my way up. I've been territorial herald, I've been a college herald, and I've been several staff officer positions within the College of Heralds before I finally got to be Crescent. So it is something you do kind of have to work up towards and have to have knowledge of the inner workings of the college. But you don't have to be a master at all the things. You can just kind of know what's going on and that sort of thing.
Oh, cool. So it's kind of like you earn your tenure all the way up the chain. So, so I think I have a pretty good idea of the position. If anyone has questions, they can ask. So let's talk about what we can talk about for this coming weekend. It's going to be a little bit different than the standard 12th night coronation, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. We are still going to have the usual kind of 12th night celebrations, I think, less officially, and we're still going to have the final court of their majesties Alexander and Tahira, but they will be stepping down, and Pansa and Katherine will be stepping up as a royal authority. They will be king and queen, but we're going to be waiting for an in-person coronation. So the difference there is that it's an ascension instead of a coronation. And that happens in normal life. We find that, in the English crowns dating way, way back, where they assume the crown or assume authority as soon as the previous monarch dies, and then they wait, be able to have a time of mourning, and they can have the time to plan the coronation, which is a huge event. And then that can be months to a year and a half, 2 years later, and then they get coronated. And that entire time, they're still king or queen. In our case, it'll be king and queen with full royal authority. But then we get to have that wonderful celebration. So the idea is that we're holding off to have an in-person coronation so that we can have that celebration, so we can end our period of mourning with something very joyous and something very personal and poignant.
Okay, so it's like a coronation, but no, basically it's going to happen.
It's an ascension. So they again, they'll receive the entire royal authority, but they just won't be wearing their crowns.
Right.
So
okay.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, we built up a new ceremony for it so that we have that same sort of feel to it, and we can still see the exchange of power happen. But we're going to, like I said, the coronation is supposed to be celebration, and right now with the feeling of the world and what's going on with this pandemic, it's just not the right time to have that sort of celebration. As much as we all need it, we want to make sure that we can do it in person, and we can do it right, and we can do it safely.
Right, and I'm sure there'll be more explanation during court, and maybe even afterward, if there's people questions, there'll be reference or whatever, so people can have a clearer idea of the situation we're in, right? And
and then we'll definitely have an official proclamation that will be going out, along with a little bit of a Q&A thing that kind of went out when we had a regency. It's just, hopefully it'll answer everybody's questions. And if not, please email myself or Mary. We'll be happy to answer any questions that come about on it.
Okay, very cool. And you will still refer to their highnesses soon after this coming weekend as their majesties going forward.
It'll still be their majesties, King Pansa and Queen Katherine.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a little bit clearer, because I know it's going to be a little bit different than before.
It is a weird. It does divert a little bit from tradition, but we are a little bit in non-traditional times, so we're doing what we can in order to still maintain the magnificence of our crown and the magnificence of our kingdom, but still do it to the constraints that we have. Yeah.
Right. So it'll be a unique experience
for
those that have gone to over 50 coronations over the years. Anyway, so, and one last thing before I bring Bjorn in to answer, I'm not answer, to ask much better questions is, last week I saw a notice come through that a project you've been working on for a while came to fruition, and that is trying to register the Cross of Caid. Is that correct?
To an extent. So the Cross of Kait has actually been registered since before our kingdom was a kingdom. It was a war banner. It's the 4 crescents conjoined saltire horns outward. What we've been working on as a College of Heralds for 20 some odd, 24 years, I believe, is trying to get it blazoned as a Cross of Caid instead of blazoned as 4 crescents conjoined and saltire horns outward. One is very euphonious and short. The other one is a lot of words that nobody really knows what it means anyway, unless you're a herald. And even then, what is it? So I turned in a submission that basically outlined why it is a cross, why it should be called the Cross of Caid, what named crosses were. And finally, the college agreed to an extent. They agreed that it was a name motif, and they agreed to blazon it as the Cross of Caid. So I'm very excited for that. It now means that all of our blazons are much shorter and allows us to have the Cross of Caid be officially recognized as the Cross of Caid.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And there was a lot of research and paperwork and dancing around the request to make this happen.
So we've been trying since 1996 to get this registered. And the very first time that we tried to register it, it was just basically, hey, we want to name it this. And the college was like, well, there's no documentation for that. So no. So then we came back with some documentation. We're like, well, okay, well, there were named crosses in period, and it was done by longstanding usage by the folks who were around and were using it. Like basically, like the Cross of St. George was known as the Cross of St. George because people were calling it that. And so the college was like, okay, cool, but they didn't blazon it that way. So no, you can still call it vernacularly, whatever you want to call it. That's awesome. That happened, but we don't have any documentation. And so we kept going through year after year, trying again periodically of like, well, what about this? And they'd be like, document it. Show us that it happened. And I know this doesn't bode well for saying good things about the College of Heralds, but this is a kind of an extraordinary case. So finally, a few years ago, we found named crosses. And so we submitted that. And we're like, listen, here's examples of named crosses. And they were like, cool. But this isn't a cross to period heralds. And so at that point, I took that as, challenge accepted. And so I went through and found all kinds of heraldic treatises that actually talk about what crosses are and how they're constructed and how they're named, and built all that up into an argument and sent that back and was like, but really, like, no, this is a thing. And so they agreed with a lot of it. They didn't agree with some of it. And thankfully, they agreed with enough of it, though, that they were like, finally said, yes. And so, yeah, no, it took a while. Normally, it only takes, like we can find like a single example or anything like that. Or you can build what's called an individually attested pattern, which my armory is an individually attested pattern. It's a weirdness in in its own way, where if you can show that it happened, they'll let you have it, which is fantastic, but you have to show it in the same patterns. And so finding the patterns and finding the ways to really prove it took some time, because it is, again, it's a weirdness. For things conjoined in saltire, you wouldn't think that they'd be considered a cross, but at this point, it's a named motif for what we use. And because we've been using it since before the kingdom was a kingdom, it's now finally, long enough standing and whatnot that it works.
And because of that ruling, each kingdom's now allowed to register one. Is that correct?
Yes. So that's the fun thing is what we were aiming for was literally just to have the Cross of Caid being blazoned across of Caid and let it end with that. But because of this now, every kingdom gets to have one named motif. So it can be like the lion of Antir, or it could be like the tiger of the east, or Unfortunately, I don't know if the cross of Caltrava that Callantir uses can be a cross of Callantir, but that's something that we got to figure out. But yeah, so every kingdom gets to have one now, and it's going to be permanent. They can only have one, and so it's got to be one of those things where it's like, really think about it. Really, like, how deep of an association is it? Because this is yours, it's permanent, and it's, you can't change it 20 years down the road. And that's good for us because, I mean, like I said, we've been using it since the 70s. It's not going anywhere. I mean, it's on all of our regalia. It's on all of our banners. It's on all of our stuff. So thankfully, ours is very long standing. But yeah, no, every kingdom gets one. And so it was astounding to finally to get that large of an impact for something that was really just supposed to be just our cross and just for a couple of our items to be named that.
That's amazing. So, like, if they wanted to, they could register the laerties of Atenveld.
They could.
Yes, because I'm sure they would want to do that.
If Atenveld or no, I guess Atenveld is a kingdom. Yeah. So yeah, they could, of course
they claim they are.
I was thinking Altavia because but yeah, no, they could if they wanted to, but I think that.
Well, we'll see. So you were saying, it's been going through the office for about 20 years, and if I remember right, you're an associate of Cormac. Is that correct?
I am. Yes, I have been for about 7 years.
and he was in that position, right?
He was.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that you were able to accomplish something that Cormac didn't. So
I did. I was able to get the Cross of Caid blazoned where Cormac was not.
Huh. That's amazing. Well, on that note, now that I've ticked off both Cormac and the King of Atenveld, let's bring in Bjorn with some much better questions than what I
had. Well, we'll wait. Is my mic muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, good, because I hear it. There's a thing that was saying my mic was muted, and then it faded into obscurity, much like these great questions of mine are going to. So, first off, the question about the Cross of Caid was an excellent question. Thank you, Laertes. Second, so as a Crescent, and you are an administrator, but you still oversee the main 3 arms of heraldry. Just for the folks at home who may not be very familiar with what those are, would you mind telling us what the main 3 forks of heraldry are, just so folks can know?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 of them, kind of in order, is court heraldry, which is going to be all things court and precedence. So the live courts, the order of precedence, which is basically where you rank within the awards. Also court reports and that sort of thing. That's one facet of it. The next one is what we call book heraldry, which is going to be names and armory submissions. So anytime you want a device or a name registered, it's all the research and documentation that goes behind that. And then field heraldry, which is a lot of the list announcing, war cries, and any sort of thing that needs a vocal sort of announcement and that sort of aspect of it. And that's a generalization of each of the 3, but those are the kind of main functions of each.
Excellent. So in that order, so you have Courtesy and Golden Rose that work with the court.
Yep.
And then you have Dolphin that handles submissions. And then you have Bellows that handles the field work.
Correct. And those are all the kingdom level deputy positions for such. So.
The people that are directly beneath you that report to you.
Correct.
And then they have folks that also work for them. Now there's a couple of ones that I'm a little unclear on, and I was hoping you could help us out, because I've seen, what is the Battlement Herald in Caid?
So the Battlement Herald is the deputy who handles Great Western War business. So they kind of end up being the administrative or whatnot overseer of all heraldic activities at Great Western War.
So they're the one that is in charge of Herald's Point, for example.
They can be. They can either take on the needs for each of those different heraldic positions within the war itself, or they can delegate it out to another herald. Their ideas, they're basically kind of like the Crescent Light, as it were, for Great Western. So they will oversee all of the heraldic functions that happen from Grand Court to the submissions table to the war cries, or any field cries that need to happen during any of the tournaments that happen there, just to kind of make sure that it's one point of contact for the staff to reach and then delegate out and whatnot. And I see that Nico just asked a question about our silent heralds, court heralds, and I would say yes, they are. Outside of that, they also do, interpretation for a lot of other things. But yeah, so their main function is to make sure that all the heraldic things at war happen and that they happen smoothly. So even if they want to delegate out running the consultation table to somebody else, and more recently we've been having our submissions herald, Aridana, the Dolphin Herald, oversee that aspect specifically, and then that frees up the battlement to take care of some of the other stuff.
Wonderful. One other thing I wanted to ask is that because we're having a court for this upcoming weekend, and people send in award letter recommendations to the Crown, and some of these are acted on, some of them are not, and then the process is then relayed to heralds. But then there's a whole bunch of people that are involved in between that scroll being put in a person's hands or them receiving the piece of regalia and then the recorder placing it digitally on our order of precedence. So there's the recorder, there's courtesy and golden rose. Can I ask, in your opinion,
Sure.
Just how challenging is it for us running courts in the digital space right now?
Honestly, I find it a little bit easier as a court herald to run it in the digital format because it can be a little more scripted. It can be a little bit more structured. And then when it comes time to writing your court reports, because a lot of these awards are given not necessarily if the person is in court or not in absentia. We don't write them as in absentia for these courts because we assume that people will get the information. You can basically just mark down which awards were given, cut and paste them right out of the docket and send them in on a court report. So that part's a little bit easier. And normally in a live court, you have to track who gets their award and who was absent. So that way you can save it for a later court to give out, or if their majesties decide to give it in absentia, then you have to mark it that way and it gets recorded in that aspect. So the organization on that and the tracking of that is a little easier, but we are still having to track who got their scrolls and who didn't, and making sure that the promissories and the actual medallions get to there. And that can be a little bit more difficult because we have to keep a backlog of it and just make sure that that happens. And all of that is done in conjunction with the scribe Amarius, who is the same sort of idea of if you take Crescent and you move them over to the College of Scribes, they're the ones who are in charge of facilitating all of those sorts of scroll assignments, making sure that all the scrolls in conjunction with Crescent follow all the guidelines that we have to make sure that the scrolls can be sealed and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it can get fuzzy, but I mean, if you're as a court herald turning in your court report, it gets right to recorder gets it right into the OP, and that turnaround is usually within like 48 hours so that the scribes have the information that they need in order to make the scrolls.
That is fantastic. My last question is, so you were talking about the 4 levels of heraldry within our structure, within most structures of kingdoms, where you have macers, pursuivants, capital H heralds, and heralds extraordinaire. But I've also heard that there is extraordinaire in other positions, like technically I am a macer extraordinaire.
Yeah.
What is extraordinaire? What does it mean?
The Herald Extraordinary, lowercase h or whatever proficiency you want to add in there, it usually means one that is not dedicated to a particular role or one who is traveling. It's still kind of a staff herald, but doesn't really have a staff position, if that makes sense. So if you aren't a specific job, like, so once I stepped down as Crescent, I actually don't have a specific job within the college coming up, other than to support our incoming Crescent and support the staff that's already there in the ways that I usually did before I even stepped up. And that's to just kind of make sure that they have what they need, or help where I need to help, or jump in whatever facility that I need to jump in. And so I don't have a staff title, so I will be a Herald Extraordinary, lowercase e, not capital E, if that makes sense. Because the capital Herald Extraordinary, capital H, capital E, is the
big ones.
The big ones, yes, the very rare one. But yes, as Adam has said, a freelance herald, essentially.
I'm very proud of my freelance heraldry. I enjoy it tremendously. But
as well. So,
well, I thank you very much for answering the questions, and in all sincerity, I think you've done an amazing job. We have truly enjoyed having you in the position during your tenure, and especially this has been the most, oh, the word for it. This has been probably the most hellacious way to end one's tenure in the midst of a pandemic and fire that is the 2020 and such.
I'm happy that it came towards the end of my tenure instead of at the beginning. It allowed me to give that chance to kind of get into the role, figure out how it all works, and build those relationships and build that confidence in order to be able to address, the stuff that came in as it did. And we do have a kind of a joke within the Crescent, or decrescents as we call them. Everybody who's served as Crescent and kind of moved on, or the decrescent is the I've stepped down as Crescent role. But that's if you stay more than the 2 years, then something happens in that third year. Cormac had the Masters of Defense and some big law changes and some other